Bonsoir, bienvenue.
Good evening. Welcome to this Standing Committee on Strategies and
Stratégie,
Public Policies,
politique,
not political,
non, là,
not
mais
blue, white,
policy en
and
anglais,
red, but policies.
initiative, et
And
euh, est une opportunité pour,
this is an opportunity,
comme ce
in
soir,
some cases like tonight especially,
présentation de la part
to
des
receive
membres
presentation from members of the from the municipal staff, from management, to have an open discussion
communauté,
with the community in general,
public,
with the
et
public community, if you wish,
évidemment avec les membres du
and
conseil,
obviously with the
avoir une
members of
discussion sur la
council to have a
direction
discussion
dans la
on the
différente
direction that we
procédure
want to take
à
in certain
pouvoir
file in order
discuter
to be
ouvertement
able to discuss openly, number one,
communiquer avec
and two,
les
to better
citoyens de cette
communicate with the
municipalité.
citizens of
Alors
this
sur ce, sans plus
municipality.
tarder, notre
That
première
being said, our
présentation,
first
c'est
presentation
programme de soutien aux
is a
événements
support
sportifs.
program for sports
C'est Luc
event.
Bugeaud qui va
Mr.
présenter
Luc Bugeaud will make the presentation
ce sujet.
on that issue.
Merci, Monsieur le maire.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Bonsoir, bonsoir, membres du
Good
conseil.
evening, members of council. I'm happy to
Programme
present to you a new program that we are
ce
putting
soir,
forward.
c'est simplement de
Tonight
donner
is
une présentation du
simply
programme
to give you the outline of
auquel le
this
conseil
program,
a donné
and
lieu.
we'll come back to the council
Ceci
in
fait
due
un
time.
peu une certaine suite
This is kind of a follow up, if you wish,
présenté le
to
14
what I
septembre
presented on September the
sur la thématique
14th,
questionnaire de
where
taxation
we talk
sur
about
les
the
événements, puis
taxation,
pourcentage pour la
without
promotion des événements
taxation,
à
and
la ville de
also
Dieppe. Alors, l'événement,
taxation for
les
events.
événements
What we're
sportifs,
proposing here is for
une politique
sports events.
existe dans
A
le
policy exists,
L16.
the policy
Pour les
L16.
programmes sportifs,
They talk about
je sais que ce
sports
programme a été
event, and I know
modifié
that policy will
pour
be
refléter
amended to reflect
madame ici va répondre aux besoins
this will meet
dans l'attraction des événements
the
sportifs.
needs in the sport
Alors,
events attraction.
j'ai un résumé ici
I have a summary
du programme.
of the program,
Il y
if
a
you wish.
beaucoup d'autres éléments
There's a lot
dans le
more
programme.
elements, and I will
C'est un
send it to
programme
you, but
qu'on a
this is a
développé
program that has
suite
been
à
developed
plusieurs consultations
following
avec
several
les
consultations. The
organisations
city of Dieppe
internationales
is
des sports, tourisme
part
Canada.
of Sports Tourism Canada, a
C'est
national
un événement
organization.
fort
It's a
dans la
very
gestion
strong event. We have the
au
opportunity to
conseil
meet
national.
stakeholders at the
J'ai
national
participé
level.
à
I've
cette
attended,
deuxième conférence cette
I
année, mais
attended a second
il faut
conference
faire
this
attention
year,
que
but
beaucoup des
I
municipalités
noticed
ont
that a lot of
organisé
municipalities have this kind
attirer
of
des
program
événements
to
sportifs
attract
majeurs.
major
Alors,
sports events.
je pense que
So
notre
Dieppe,
conseil
I
devrait
believe it's
développer un
important that
programme.
Dieppe should give
C'est ce que
itself
je vais vous présenter
such
ce
a
soir.
program, and that's what I want to present tonight.
Alors, sans plus
So
tarder, je vais vous
without
expliquer le
further
programme.
delay, I'll
L'engagement
explain the program.
qui a été
The
entrepris pour
undertaking
le programme.
that have been
Alors,
taken
des
for
consultations
that program, we
avec
consulted with
également
other
des
communities at the Atlantic
je peux dire
level
qu'il
and all over Canada. I can tell you
y a diverses municipalités qui l'ont.
several
Moi,
municipalities
je me
have
suis
it.
beaucoup basé sur celle
I
de
based
Montréal.
myself on the one from Montreal.
Évidemment,
There
c'est
were
pas
some
le
very good
l'équivalent de
elements.
Montréal.
It's not the same amount of money
Oui, le
than
comité
Montreal, but
canadien
Montreal, they have
a
leaders,
des championnats
Canadians, to receive
qui
sports
gagnent des
championship.
trophées pour
They
leur
win awards
participation.
every year for their capabilities of receiving such
Aussi,
events.
comme que je vous ai dit, Sport
As I
Tourisme Canada,
said,
c'est
Sports
un
Tourism Canada
organisme.
is
Et
an
étant
organization.
la ville de
And
Dieppe
by
étant membre,
Dieppe
on a
being a member,
beaucoup
we have access
d'informations
to
à
a
bord
lot of
de
information.
la
They
recherche
have data bank, they have
et
research.
l'information
We've
de cette
used some
association.
information coming from that
On a aussi formé un petit groupe de travail
association. We established an
pour
internal task
cet
force,
exercice
and
collectif.
by meeting some sports
On a eu
group
une
in Dieppe,
information tout proche
we have
de
had
leurs
a
besoins.
very
Et
good
je pense que ce programme ici
overview of what their needs
poursuit
was.
avec le programme
And if we
sportif a
pursue
été
this program, it will be well received by our people.
alors, les objectifs du programme,
The objectives of the program,
premièrement, c'est augmenter le
first of
nombre
all, to increase
d'événements
the
sportifs
number of
participants.
major sport
Si je vous
events
dis
in Dieppe.
tantôt, il y a
I'll
trois types de
explain. There are
programmes
three
sportifs,
facets,
d'événements sportifs.
three kinds of sports events.
Positionner Dieppe comme une
to position Dieppe as a destination to maximize the leg. It can be the sports, the fallout. If you think that we have an important championship, I'll give you an example. We've had the cyclist national cycle championship. The young people saw these athletes, they saw what it meant. So when we bring important events, it can motivate our young people to become athletes and to pursue at a higher level. There are economic fallout. We will be recognized by the media and also social recognition. It'll give a certain pride to the people of the to increase the belonging. I can tell you when we have major events, we've had the Jeux de l'Acadie on two occasions. Quebec it created a pride, and it created also the development of volunteerism. And I think it was a positive impact on the long-term basis for the municipality. The last one, but not the least, is to maximize our infrastructure, our facilities. Dieppe gave itself important facilities, whether it be baseball field, Uniplex that will open shortly, whether it's the future project on which we're presently working, we have potential to receive championship and major events. As I said, there are three facets to the program. Number one, these are maximum amounts. I did not explain everything today, but there's a series of criteria that we evaluate, and it's the maximum. The amount you see here are a maximum if it's an international event. And by the way, for an international, we would need five. It says in the program, the organizing committee could obtain up to a maximum of $30,000. That facet two, that are national events, 20,000. And number three, we did not name it provincial championship. Sometimes we see it that way, but we said other competition. What are we looking for? Is we're looking for to have a higher number of participants. It doesn't have to be a provincial championship. It can be an organization that create a sports event, a huge one, and they name it, not necessarily a provincial championship. So all the facets, the event in question needs 40% of the participants of 150 kilometers and more. The reason that we put it in the program is we wanted to that the people who come here, but they will use the restaurant, use the hotel, live here. It's frequent in other programs that I checked. So 40% of the participants must come from 150 kilometers away from the. If there's only 20% that come from outside the municipality, they don't qualify for this project. The other element, I put it as a note, we explained it in the program. We will also consider if there is a huge demand in service from the municipality in kind, maybe we'll reduce the financial amount that we would give as a municipality and evaluate because certain championship they need more in kind participation and less money, but they need certain services. If you understand what I'm saying. Evaluation criteria, I mentioned a few, there's some more. Should be a recognized sports, recognized by the provincial or federal association. There are exceptions in extreme sports, and extreme sports has a huge trend, and there's a lot high figure of participation. It's one of the high tendency in the sports. It's extreme sports. We can't exclude it, and we've already been approached for an extreme. It did not work out, but we could have more. We talk about sanctions. If they need certain sanctions, they should have it. The duration, we talk a minimum of 2 consecutive days. We don't want a championship where there's only one day because then there's no lodging involved. There's no economic. We say 2 consecutive days. I've talked about the distance of the participants, the number of participants, because in facet three, it depends on the number of participants. This is what will influence the figure or the contribution that the municipality will contribute. Representation of province and countries. I've told you an international championship is 5D, and then it's 5 provinces. That's what is explained in the program. We'll check out the economic impact, and we talk about having an event on our territory in Dieppe. We talk about 51% of the event should be in Dieppe. There can be exceptions. I can give you an example. We've had with the baseball midget championship, there were 2 fields. One was in Dieppe and one in Moncton. So 50%. Well, there can be certain exceptions to the rule. As to the financial contribution, we to payment, one of 70% at first. When we accept the application, there will be a process online, and we wait for the report. We wait for the report to be completed to give the 30% at the end of the event or a few weeks after the end. There are clauses of refund or reimbursement if the event is canceled, if we don't have the size that we expected in the application. There are clauses of reimbursement that are mentioned. There's a series of expenditures that we say admissible or not. Referee, it's a big expense. Referees, it can be. We don't have the expertise in that region. What we're proposing, we're ready to pay the amount of lodging and expenses inside the municipality, but the expenses to come to the app, we don't pay. We don't want the National Federation to pay these expenses. That's one example only. Events that I excluded, they have to be excluded because we excluded professional events, box, golf tournament. Within this framework, they're excluded events for which the city of Dieppe have an agreement as far as financial contribution. We don't want to uh, double or make a duplication. If we would have another program in Dieppe, they would have a subsidy within another of our program. We want to make sure that there's not double dipping. It did happen within another program. Convention, us, it's sports events. Salon, conference, that's not it. Even if it's related to the sports, if it's a conference on sport, it does not meet the requirements for this. There's another policy, another program for that one. Training camp, events, fundraising for sports. It can be a golf tournament, I don't know, for community association, a fundraising event. We will not, but not sponsor. We will not be a partner with such an organization. That's my presentation for tonight. I will come back with the program, the full program. I present it for approval. It would be an asset. It's part of our strategy to develop a sports tourism in Dieppe. If we want to be a player at the table, I see the other municipalities, they offer. We have to offer amount to attract people. Mr. Cadet, question for clarification, and then a question. Clarification. When you say international event 30, I assume it's up to 30,000. It can be less, yes. Second, when we fix amounts like that, let's say there's an amount, an event that that we could benefit from. It will take 30,000 or 35,000. We really want to have it do we exclude that event completely, or it's a question of making an exemption, come back to the council? What happens in such a, we come back to the council. It's back to the council for consideration. The example I gave for the baseball, we did it, came back, it was 50%. It can happen that we would only have 50% would come back to the council. There can be certain exemptions that are justifiable. If they are, then it's acceptable. W- Why exclude professional event? If ever we had the Canada Cup, the golf tournament here on our golf course and it costs 50,000, would we say we're not in the game? What happens? The reason why we put it this way was to develop amateur sport. If we want to open it to professional sport, we can do it. But there again, the question that you have, I would come back to the council. If there is an exceptional opportunity for the city of Dieppe to get involved and will have positive fallout, I would come back. Sometimes the economic elements goes beyond the sports aspect. You want to develop the amateur sport, I understand, but there might be economic data that would become important. So we should consider that. Thank you. If I may, Your Worship, it would be to look at such an event. If it's professional, maybe it'd be a sponsorship. That's something that we could consider. If so, if it's something, there would be a recommendation made to the council. So that could be within another envelope. Councilor Brido, when you talk about other group, distance 150 kilometers, an event that happens like the Jeux de Canadian game, and it includes the whole province. So, in what qualification would they be? The young amateurs that we want to develop for the future. It would be other in facet 3. $4,000 for Acadian game. It does not meet the budget. We'd have to come back. That is an exceptional example. Madame Leboutier, what do we look at for a budget, global budget per year? The money we're looking at, the income we have at taxation is a presentation that we made last year. In the program, also we mentioned that it's only the capacity of the city of Dieppe to cover the cost, because some years there can be several applications, could be exceptional, but maybe we can't accommodate each application, depends on the budget. Now on taxation, it's hard to answer because we're finalizing an agreement with the Greater Moncton Hotel Association how to share the lodging tax, and we'll have something for the council shortly, but we have to go according to our capabilities to have more than one national or international event per year. 2 could be the limit because they will require people, involvement, volunteers, and a whole gamut of activities that exist. And it's enormous outside a COVID period. In the program, we mentioned that these amounts depend on the capabilities of the municipality. It's not a guarantee. We'll come with a budget for an international event and 2 nationals and regional participation. But taxation at the present time, Director of Finance indicated we have a certain amount right now that is set aside that we can use towards this. How many provinces to the national? 5 including New Brunswick. We have an event already next year. We've had it for 3 years. It's Coupe Canada for mountain cross. July, and the following year it'll be in August. With the Cycling and National Association, we've had that event. That's one that we're getting. Better question. The evaluation criteria, we look at the participation, but the distance, whatnot. The weight that we'll put, there will be a weight that will, so the impact of the number and the participant should have a weight. It should have an impact on the economic aspect. Yes, it is a question as for one of the facets or all of them, especially the evaluation criteria. Well, we go up to putting a weight towards the criteria to have a transparency on the project that will be submitted. And if I look, the number of participants and the duration should have more weight than the provincial presentation. 8 provinces, 2 days, and you have 10 participants. Well, would that be in your program? Yes, it does exist already in facet 3. We've specified it to the number of participants for team sports or individual sports. A championship or a sport event that is individual, usually there's less participants than a team sport. So that one, we mentioned the number of participants. In the other scenarios, there'd be a weight, but normally a national championship, a lot is related, I wouldn't say notwithstanding the number, a championship event, certain criteria have to be observed. It's another kind of organization involved. I would have something to bring back. Did we think it would be to see in the past, and I get and under other form, one of the great challenge if we want to develop the sport, tourism, the association, we have volunteers. What is missing is the preparation of these documents that's very expensive. And most of the time the means are not there. I would like to see in this program that at least that they would be able to establish a fund per year, start with $5, $10, $15,000, so that these organizations could present to the national level if we want to develop the city. At least should have that base with the criteria. The first request, the serious is there, fine, and then support them because the program comes after the approval and the challenge is before. Upon the application, it can go up to $10,000 and it goes fast. Excellent point. And we're presently working already. We're completing a project that can be more general in nature, but we are working on a document. This is after the approval is finished, but in the admissible, we talk with training, education, and the volunteer. And that's an element that is important. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thibodeau. Thank you, Worship. I have one question. It's in the evaluation. You talk about sanction. You know, sanction means different things. What do you mean? Sanction, a national sanction for a championship or an international sanction. It's at these two levels. The provincial or national federation will apply these sanctions. Thank you. Other question?
J'en vois pas d'autres. Alors, merci de
No,
votre
no other.
présentation.
Thank you for the
J'ai hâte de
presentation.
voir le produit final.
I can't wait to see the final product.
Prochaine présentation,
Next one, next
on
presentation.
va parler de rezonage.
We'll talk about rezoning here. Land use planning trends over recent year. Mr. Gerard, Mr. Fenette, and Gerard.
Donc, comme il a été dit,
As the title says, it's the trends of the final year. It's interesting because, as you said,
le Boutillier qui nous avait
Councillor de Boutillier asked us a question to know if
raison
there was a reason why we brought rezoning back
un vote puis,
here
je pense que c'est important.
for a vote.
C'était justement
It's important to mention it is our intention to meet you to talk about the latest trend, not only rezoning, but since we've been in existence, since we made an amendment to zoning by law, a document that is good for 10 years, but with a possibility of amending it on a yearly basis
le besoin est nécessaire.
when the need exists. The last years, we see certain trends, which is normal. We have different challenges,
Situation propre à notre région, propre à
economic situation, as well as
etc. Donc,
situation dealing with the planners. There's several issues, and we have other items we'd like to discuss with you. Tonight, the purpose is to have
votre rétroaction, voir
your retroaction to see when it's time to bring some amendments. It's always our building period in April, September, and October this year. In spite of COVID, you've seen the figures. We've issued more building permit than last year, this year. Things look very good. We have a development that's went ahead for our building season. That is very interesting. It's positive. However,
on a quand même certains défis.
we have certain challenges and we understand them.
Tous nos clients,
We understand the challenge of all our clients, but certain standards
au niveau légal,
have to be looked at legally speaking. Our intention for us is to present a few of these items.
ça sera le temps
Others will be added
d'édition d'amende.
when it's time to make a proposal for an amendment to the two bylaw that I mentioned. Following that, we think we will be able to present this in the fall,
Novembre probablement.
probably in November or December.
Donc,
Sorry.
comme présentation, on va parler des
Presentation will talk about rezoning, family housing, development in downtown, parking, specific material. Some decisions were made,
rencontrer tous ces critères-là.
and to see if they met all the criteria, development, first and second downtown, propose something. We'll bring you a suggestion tonight, and according to your wish, development along the Dieppe Boulevard, by opposition to what we're proposing, the orientation of building, non-conventional development. Non-conventional development translates by a development where there's more than one building on the same lot. There's not necessarily public roads, it's private roads. There's no subdivision. There's no public utility given, park or trail or money to be able to contribute to pursue the economy for that area. We'll talk about a small file that is protected in the front yard. I know that our neighbors have talked about it, but we'll talk about our own situation if we may. So history as to the different bylaws, different application for rezoning, which you can see the number of rezoning that we've had. As I said earlier, Alexander and I were working for regional commission in 2013. We see the rezoning there has been, and we have 4 or 5 rezoning per year. There's been more with bylaw 9648. These rezoning were done when there was in Dieppe, Boulevard Dieppe, and the annexation of some territory where we had to attribute a certain zone to these territory.
Comme je viens de mentionner,
As I just said,
demande en moyenne
5 requests per average, and this year in 2020 there's been a total of 7 applications. It's fresh, the rezoning application for a building on the lot or
multifamiliale.
multi-family dwelling.
Je pense avant de passer à la prochaine
Before we go to the next slide,
Alexandre va venir présenter.
Alexandre will come to make a presentation. I think it's important to explain
Quand vous voyez un
when you see a rezoning project, when we bring a project, it's the same thing when we bring variances with the pack. A lot of work has been done beforehand. So I know that question is asked, where is there variance? Why do we bring variances? Why didn't you meet the bylaw? Of course, the bylaws are not perfect. We try to have bylaws that try to cover as much as possible the development, but there's always gray zones or new trends that make it such that we have to study the question whether we have to amend our bylaw. But what I'm trying to say is it's good to consider that quite often we have discussion with the developer, and to propose previously is not the result that we are presenting to you. There's a lot of negotiations that is undertaken and generally goes well, but other time we have developers, in spite of the fact that we say we won't be able to make a favorable recommendation, they try to go ahead. We have to understand that we are mandated by the council where we make a professional recommendation. You're responsible to either accept with an amendment, refuse it. These are the options you have, but the final decision is yours. We'll give a few examples that we've had to work with developers in the last few years. I'll let my colleague explain them to you.
Donc, juste un exemple ici de
An example here, if I may, of a work we did with the developer at the time. It's a rezoning that goes to 2013. It's a proposal
début en termes de
at the beginning
voir une recommandation positive
to see a positive recommendation for the project. It was very intensive.
avec la carte de l'appui.
If you look at the map in front of you,
À Lionel, la Oxiard, nord du
Lionel, Export, not the north, you have a Beaumont or Bernard.
un aménagement
It
intérieur.
was an infield development.
Le beurre est intéressé à amener
The developer was interested in bringing 3 multi-family dwelling with 4 floors each. We tried to work with him to see if he could reduce the density. At the time, he was confident that he could bring the file to an acceptable level and for the council to accept it. But within the process of rezoning the public hearing, there was a strong opposition as to the integration of the project. So he himself decided to withdraw his application. We're still talking with the developer to see if there are any opportunities to develop the land at the present time. The land limits the development of a single family dwelling. We will have a development that will integrate better with the development. If I give you another example, that we work with a few developers for a development. At the time, the initial proposal, it's land that is south of Margaret, right here. A proposal that you have seen recently, but with another proposal. So initially, It was to bring four buildings of 3 stories, 120 lodging. It was a development with no subdivision intensity that we found that could not necessarily integrate with the environmental. We had several much discussion. We were able to arrive at a compromise with him. He proposed to bring two public and to change to uh, uh, the row houses. We see even if it's within rezoning process, we see that at least there's a disrespect the term of the municipal how it happened in field development without compromising the integrity of the fact. So
Permettre aussi, juste pour
if
stabiliser
I
les
may, for
choses,
that example, it was a real example.
développement interplanetaire.
Often when we talk about infield development, it's a development that
Puis,
exists
de plus en plus, les gens, puis on le voit là, quand
more
on
and more when we
fait
have to send letters to the neighbors as much to ask for rezoning as much as variances. People tell us, look, we want to have a visibility in our sectors. There are houses, weak density houses, single family dwelling for most. In this case here, more especially, we had to inform the neighbors twice for the subdivision for the zoning. People would tell us before we explained what the project was. They didn't want to have an apartment block in their backyard. And when we presented what the request was of row houses or semi-detached for them, they were ready to accept that kind of development and the detriment of apartment block that would have changed a lot. That is a good example that we've had to work this year. We were not ready to make a recommendation of four buildings, but three stories. We were ready to recommend this one.
C'est juste pour vous dire que les voisins, on entend beaucoup ça.
Tell you that the neighbors, we hear this people more and more when there's a property that is left in the sector where developers can maximize my profit often instead of going on the land where the zoning allowed these kind of family dwellings. We have sufficient spaces on our zoning map. The question was asked is, of course, there is economic advantage. Instead, people say instead of buying a property in a good zoning, I'll try my chance on a less expensive, and I'll take my chance. And if it goes through, I have a much cheaper land where I can maximize my profit. But on long term, it allows incidences on the figures of the municipality or the services that we have to bring to the municipalities when we think of sectors that are appropriate where there are already proximate services. We want to have multi-family dwelling, but it's easier also to have affordable lodging close to services, transit. We can maximize the public transport. The further we go from the downtown, we have that kind of development. We encourage people also to have one, two cars in multifamily unit by opposition to downtown, the first crown of downtown. Maybe we have more chances of having one car, and the public transit can be an example of to be used. And another example of rezoning where we work with the proposal to change his proposal recommendation on Namiro, a file that you dealt with this year. So the initial proposal with the development of two multifamily dwellings of 4 stories each, with 96 units on one and 144 parking spaces. We found that that was a project that was too intensive for the existing sector. We saw more the integration of development on site, even though it needed a rezoning. And the developer came back with the proposal to develop 22 lodging row houses with one or two stories. There again, it came through a rezoning, but must be noted that there's a lot of vacant properties inside the municipality that are hard to develop, and we can deal with leftover property, but I think that we have a product that can integrate itself very well in the same sector. So maybe to talk about the trends, to see what is happening development wise as to the availability inside the municipality. You have in front of you a graphic that shows the percentage of multifamily dwelling built during the year in the greater Moncton area. Just to take a second, if you have any question to ask while the subject is there, is fresh, instead of coming back, sometimes you don't be shy to slow them down or to interrupt. Thank you. Go ahead. If you look in 1990 in the Greater Moncton, that included Dieppe, Riverview, and Moncton, and the surrounding around the municipalities. The single family dwelling represented 65-70% of all new constructions. So in the year, if there were 100 new, but 65% of these construction were single family dwelling. So we drew a line of trends, and the trends is downward. So the Greater Moncton area, we look more now at a trend of 25, 30, 35% of all new construction are represented by a single family dwelling. So maybe it can be the question of developing more row houses, more multifamily, semi-detached. It's a new trend that we must consider within our zoning. It's well, in my opinion, it's well reflected inside our municipality. There's several sectors that allow row houses and multifamily dwelling, but as you can see, it's a trend that people have more trends to direct in a different. I have a question, but when when we look at that trend, this is only for Dieppe Mountain Review, the metropolitan area. So it includes the parish of Moncton. Yes, it would be considered inside the Moncton Metro and the LSD that are around Moncton. Well, it's in the same line of thought, but it's percentage. Sometimes we can make figures say what we want. The number of family, not a percentage, the number, is it similar? Single family dwelling houses built. Trend wise, I mean, the percentage and the number is the same. Yes. Well, it varies from year to year. If I have a figure in 2000, I had 377 units in all. So multifamily dwelling and the semi-detached. And in 29, we had 500. In 2012, we had 268. And then in 2019, we had 312, 317. So we can make an average around 250, 300 per year. So inside 300, well, they had it in the app. That'd be my next chart. We're in the 10 or 15%. So if we have 15% of 300, 45, so approximately 45 single family dwelling is built. All the others are semi-detached or row houses. So the trend this year is multifamily dwelling. Multifamily dwellings that were built. This year, it represents the region quite well.
Donc, vous avez devant vous là, le graphique.
So you have in front of you the graphic
Donc, les statistiques
for Dieppe. So statistics were available only from 2010. We see the trend for 10 years. As you can see, the trend is downward for single family dwelling.
Donc, ce qu'on continue aussi, c'est au niveau du secteur résidentiel à la base.
Remember the residential in the town, there's a transition zone.
Aussi,
And I think also there's another question before you go further. Take your worship, before you go further, when you say we have a trend downward, can we relate that? Because there's an increase of apartment block, if you wish, and
oui, puis on a des nouvelles formes
yes,
aussi
we have new form of that we didn't see in 25 row houses. At semi-detached, same thing. There's a lot more than we had at the time in 2005. So the access to the first property also,
c'est de plus en plus
it's more and more, it's harder. A lot of houses where the financial institution, it is more and more difficult to have access to the first house. New couples arrive with education debt. You see people, the baby boomers, are at a stage where they consider to downsize. And we see them more and more in different topology, whether it's apartment block or row houses, smaller in nature. So we'll see Statistic Canada, the percentage, the number, I should say, the number of persons per household did reduce. So maybe there's not the cut, but we see a mixture that we didn't have previously. What we call a condo, is that something that is growing, or I would say in New-Brunswick,
c'est une forme d'ownership aussi. Hein.
it's a kind of ownership, because I had a professor at the University of Montreal when I did my master's degree. She said you can have an igloo. The igloo can be considered a condo. I would say New Brunswick, it's not as attractive because the houses are quite affordable, where the people prefer to rent than to be owner at an advanced age where they have to have more luxury. If I want to leave from my unit, it's a hypothesis, but from what we hear, the trend in New Brunswick for the condominium is not necessarily something that is popular, maybe new for some people, but when we discuss with Andre Benoit, he's responsible to register the title for condominium. There's not necessarily a lot, so because it's affordable to rent a housing unit, but we can get a row house where you have a lot less maintenance or upkeep. Go on. So I was going to say, as you know, the city of Dieppe, for its development in partnership with Expansion Dieppe, we have incentive. So tonight I will not necessarily talk too much about incentive, the zone or the sector where we offer some incentive. It will be in another meeting later on, but tonight we will talk about the downtown sector and the surrounding, where we have a stock of there is a potential that we see when we talk about affordable lodging in the sector. I think we have an opportunity to modify the zoning in some of these zones where presently we have R2 for most of them, where we allow a zoning that would allow to go up to 3 or 4 units. If we look at the sector, where the Virginia is and the streets inside the residential area, it would be possible to make legal certain houses where there's 3 or 4 units. So it would allow to have a more important density in downtown, but also allowed affordable lodging within the downtown. Closer to the mic, please.
Donc, par rapport au gabarit
As to
existant
the
du secteur, puis
things that exist when we talk about a 4 unit,
petit bâtiment
it's a small
qui
building.
va s'aménager à l'intérieur du centre-ville, donc qui va permettre des bâtiments beaucoup plus
We
intenses avec
allow more intensive building inside the zone of downtown, but the surrounding that we're proposing, it would be a more residential of high density, but to recommend 3 or 4 units. But in the same line of thought, and I'll go to the next idea here is what we would propose, what R2 that would allow to go to an urban rural that would allow to go to 4 units. And the other thing we must consider in the municipal plan and division is to densify, especially to densify the downtown. However, we have certain obstacles at the present time in downtown, whereas the lands, the properties are small properties. We want to have a downtown that is dense, but they have something that allow us. We have to set back. We talk about 10 meters between a property that is on Acadia and Champlain for mixed development, commercial and story, and the zone that you see R2 here. We must go before the pack every time we have a request to allow to densify the Champlain. We have a setback that is 10 meters with the neighboring houses. We know we are in a transition sector. We have some people who bought certain properties in the sector to speculate, but there's challenges when we try to develop our downtown, and we have a situation that would make us we would have about to maximize the sport because it does not meet our bylaws. That's something that we could go over with you to have some withdrawal that's more acceptable. Mr. Gannett, I have a question. The section west of Acadia, between Regis and Champlain, there are houses in there that date from the Second World War, if not before. How come you don't target that zone, because it seems to be more than what you talk about at this time? Isn't there a possibility of targeting it so it become commercial or R2, R3? It's very well said, but we want to propose to you when we talk about the zone and the sectors of downtown and the crown, first crown, second crown, that's where we will propose to you kind of a density where we would have more than 4 units. We would allow apartment blocks like what we saw the last few years. It would be a more important density. That's why we did not touch that sector, because it's a transition zone between the downtown and highway business. That's the reason why we did not put the residential urban zone. Thank you. So this is what the transition zone, this is what it could look like, and the sector Uniplex and Champlain Street. But it could look like there's a form that respect what we have now and the transition with our zone of a higher density. We've talked about it a lot. The redevelopment of Champlain Street, as you know, for 3 or 4 years now, we've two studies were undertaken for downtown. The WXP firm and Nathalie Urbain, a firm that considered some urban development concept for the downtown, and it brought us to a reflection, if you wish. Just to tell you that internally we have a committee that is called the Sustainable Development Committee for the City of Dieppe. We deal with different issues. One that we talk about is the development of downtown, and on the committee we have a multidisciplinary committee, planners, engineer, public work, recreational. So we've studied the recommendation of these two studies, and we want to bring you a proposal when it's time to make amendments. Now let Alexandre present them.
Donc, la carte devant vous
So the map in front of you shows the streets that could be interesting to get. On the south side, there would probably be to acquire properties, land that will be needed to get the 22 meters that is required. And on the north side, we wouldn't necessarily acquire some land, but we would impose a withdraw of a minimum 1 meter to any new building that would be developed on a property north of Champlain in order to allow the people from Public Works to snow removal, and that it would not have any impact, if you wish, on the highway traffic. So on the south side, there would be a proposal to have parking on the street, and it would be by acquiring those lands. It's not a long stretch of land, but it would be essentially a portion of land to get to fulfill the 22 meters. And we would have development that would look similar to what it was proposed in the master plan for downtown India. Any question? If not, here, this is to present another study. It was required by Expansion Dieppe. And it's LGP firm from Quebec in 2019. They made a study to stimulate the development in downtown in Dieppe, and there were several things that were found, but it deals with the reasoning of Councillor Leboutillier and our way of thinking, where the firm said that they noticed that there was a lot of rezoning that was done for multifamily dwelling outside outside the zone where we have the different services for the population, and by allowing this kind of development, it makes such that we are shooting ourselves in the foot. We compete with ourselves because we allow development all over the place where we could have it and identify to really make our downtown profitable. And there are people who live after 4:30 and they continue to have a building and restaurant and whatnot.
C'était seulement pour vous montrer un peu que c'est un constat aussi d'une firme.
It was to show you that it's an outside firm that made a study for expansion Dieppe. The vision of Dieppe Boulevard, I'll let Alexandre present it. As you know, number one, in 2005, when it was developed, there was a kind of vision that was proposed. A vision here again. Nobody has a crystal ball to know how the development will occur, but with the tools, that's what we're trying to identify the kind of development, especially on an axle as important as Boulevard Dieppe. So, Alexandre. As you probably know, Boulevard Dieppe is an interesting area for the municipality. There's a lot of development, a lot of discussion internally with the developers to develop the properties. We have zoning bylaw and the municipal plan that is focused on that. It was prepared in 2005. It was prepared with Z8 and with the subsequent bylaws. So the diagram or the poster that you have in front of you, we establish a vision where it's a boulevard that is controlled. There's not many access to have access to the boulevard, but there are buildings that have withdrawal, large withdrawal. In my opinion, it's a boulevard that is mostly focused on commercial, but the integration of the golf course, the integration of a mixture of use and with commercial areas and strategic areas inside the municipality. So the poster here shows better is a vision with a group of building. As you can see, we talk about integrating a golf course on Dieppe Boulevard with an integration of single family dwelling of weaker density. So I when I noticed what was developed at the present time on Dieppe Boulevard. So Dieppe Boulevard, if we talk about Champlain, Dieppe Boulevard, Champlain, up to where the Dieppe at LeBlanc Road or just before, we have approximately 4.4 kilometers. So we have approximately 4.4 kilometers of the measures time too. So there's a we come to 8.8 of debenture, the frontage. We have 40% of the frontage on that are vacant properties. So we have an opportunity again of either making a reality of what was aimed or to change it to have a new vision, usage, or a group of buildings. So the non-developable at 10% cannot be either there's a frontage of a municipal building close to the co-op where there was a retention basin. These are properties that will never be able to develop, if you wish, for whatever reason. So there's approximately 30% of the boulevard that was developed with weak density, and it includes the frontage of the Gulf course. One third, we talk about weak density, Samuel, Court, and Andrea, Natalie. These places, we talk about 30% frontage that is developed commercial, we talk 16%, and residential high density with multi-family dwelling, several stories, we talk 6%. So as we can see, there's several use, but the mixture of this is never within a building. So if we come back to the initial picture, we we forced the residential and commercial together for a building that wants to establish on Dieppe Boulevard. So if there's no commercial, well, they can't put multifamily dwelling unless they went through a process of rezoning process. So just what I was mentioning, no mix building were developed on the Dieppe Boulevard, so residential 2, 3, 4 stories. So that's the vision that was established by the. It's always been either only commercial or multifamily dwelling. So this is where the majority of vacant property, I was talking 30% is zone CM, and the CM zone, for instance, if you want to have a multifamily, we risk the commercial at the main floor because the developer, generally speaking, especially in that context, don't necessarily feel to have several. Either they want to have multifamily dwelling or only commercial. Maybe that's a question to determine, to share with us and see what your vision is. Do we want to maintain the initial vision that we've established or that was established in 2005 and we continued with subsequent zoning, or do we want to come with a new proposal? Any question on that?
Question, commentaire?
Comment, question.
Microphone?
Doesn't cost much.
Pourquoi c'est trop cher?
A question doesn't cost too much.
Je vais vous donner un commentaire que j'en ai.
I'll give you a comment. I'll let Mr. Boutier after Councillor Kennett. Maybe they'll cover my comments.
Excuse. Merci, Monsieur le maire.
Thank you, Worship. I just want to confirm that I hear that it's your intention to, that Boulevard Dieppe will combine commercial and the apartments, and that you can build one or the other. You don't need to be an apartment with commercial inside. Did I understand that? At the present time, we were looking for your redirection. We're forcing it inside a building, on building that are zoned CM. But often we have discussion with the developers. But is it your recommendation at the present time? I think we're studying the possibility. We will certainly, in due time, will come back. Think about it. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Boutier. Thank you for the presentation. It's well said. Give us a better overview. But we talk about Boulevard Dieppe, 40%. That's interesting. You see it, but figures talk. But we've had a lot of development. We have to plan. If we look at the last 15 years, there was nothing there. There's a lot of things to think about. When you present this, whether it's on Champlain, Miro, density, or whatever. Can't wait to see the proposals that are coming forward. But one thing that I would like to raise is to see the committee, if you could look at the review when we make a rezoning R3, whether it's multi-family dwelling to single-family dwelling, as it has been the case recently. Is there a way to protect a single-family dwelling when we make a huge change? Maybe compulsory. I don't know what the solution is, but we would like that you look if there is a solution for the people that are there 20, 30 years. It's always been, we ask for a rezoning, and all of a sudden they lose what they have. Well, it's a reflex that we have. Some bylaw, park and recreation, their zones. What is good when it's rezoning? There's some density we weren't ready to recommend, but so there's been an amendment that was brought where the people said that it met certain requirements, but the council has the possibility of imposing something when it's a change of zoning. When the change is allowed, then we're limited in the condition we can impose within the pact. That's something we'll talk about, the non-traditional plus a building on a lot. Maybe there's something that we should remove as possibility, because we've had the reasoning to remove it from the possibility that we have, and it should become automatically a rezoning where it's the council that could debate the question, and not to say it's a right, but the advisory committee can impose terms and conditions that's limited on health and safety. of the citizens of the sector. If we remove that, we can impose conditions, and we can go and get some zone LPP that we can impose now. We could go get as a monetary because it allow us to invest the trail, and there is that possibility. So if we come back to Boulevard Dieppe, I think that we are open to the idea. You want to know what we think? Well, Alexandre and I were open to the idea of saying that make sure it doesn't have to be in a building. It can be on a piece of land. We've had developers, and this is what we have different developers that are good in the different aspect of development. We have people who are able to bring a mixture in different buildings, and we have other developers where they strictly want single family dwelling, and others is commercial, 100% commercial. Certain developers tell us that commercial will not work on the boulevard at a certain height, but we brought a case for daycare at the corner of Melanson, the Boulevard, two meetings ago. There's a new daycare. They got the okay to build there. So certain building, ward buildings that have a place in these sectors of the municipality. But there's definitely a potential of commercial development. But the fear that we have is to accept, if we're ready to allow some use where it would be 100 multifamily dwelling, we want to have criteria of performance criteria, because there's an area not far from the school where it was asked by the council to maintain CM. We got pressure for multifamily, only multifamily, but one developer. We had more than one developer that was interested. He wanted to build an apartment block that we see on Keith, where there's no common hallway or corridor. It's only outside stairway. It's not the kind of development that we favor for Dieppe Boulevard. So we want like the one we have on the apartment not far from the golf course. So if we are to be less severe in what we require, we want to have criteria performance that will be quality like just the same. Mr. Gadet, I will continue the discussion opened by Mr. Bouty. I give you PAC in the recommitment with the planning of the city. Can it impose that planning the power on any land that are now zoned or will be zoned? Could it have the power to require a zone between the different zones? Could it have that power? Could the council give it that no? The planning act, planning advisory commission have a recommendation to the council, and you have to impose, but you cannot delegate your power. But in a plan, you can't delegate your power. That's not what I mean. This is the plan that was approved by council. Okay, you agree? The municipal plan. Yes. So in the municipal plan, can we put in that plan that those kinds of requirements that if when a development wants to be had in a given zone, that the city can require some the council can require certain conditions. Was too easy to put it. That's my professional opinion. Maybe it's too easy to require it, but it can have residences on different. So the mechanism that exists presently was to have some zones where there are two transition zones. So a zone, a residential zone that meet another one It's the same. We see in an apartment block, there's a kitchen, there are bedrooms, a bathroom. It's the same thing as a single family dwelling. So I don't think that it would be, you have the mechanism to impose these conditions. But the problem we presently have, that's the biggest problem that we have, is we have a tendency to say it's zoned that way. The developer, if he wants to do something, we can't say anything. How can we stop saying we can't say anything? How in the future can we say we have a right to talk or we must require certain things?
J'ai pas la réponse pour vous
I don't have
nécessairement
the
sur
answer for you tonight,
la carte de
but if
visite
you look at the zoning map,
sur des
we
zones
have certain zones that are R3 where the developer develop 100%
en fait,
from
son
a
développement est
single family
bloqué
dwelling, and at the end he wants to have an apartment block.
c'est un usage qui est
It's allowed. It's allowed.
ouais,
And
raison de plus
people who bought some
le développement
single family dwelling, they thought that the development would be
uniquement avec des maisons
done
unifamiliales,
solely with single family dwelling,
est quand même
but the
permissible
zoning
pour
is allowed for multifamily dwelling. So, as I said, when it's not a rezoning, the zoning allows certain zones, such as R3, as the one that we have not far from development even. It's already R3, but it was developed 100% until now in a single family dwelling. It's it's allowed. I'm not against single family dwelling or row houses. What I'm saying is between that zone and the other zone, nobody can say anything. How can we stop this in the future?
un zonage ou un autre zonage,
If there's a
si
zoning or
jamais
another zoning, there's certain
ce qu'on impose sur ces zones
stipulation where we
c'est pas nécessairement
impose a certain criteria, not necessarily trees, but if we are to impose certain
pour gérer cet équilibre-là.
area,
S'il y a des zones
if there are trees that fall,
qui est responsable de quoi, ça, c'est pour ça,
this is why it would be the easiest way. It's each time we have a transition zone to put buffer trees, a
souhaitable. À
buffer,
tous les égards,
but it's not a thing. It's not to encourage to have a provision that we have to keep a buffer zone. Sometimes we don't have it, but because we are not able to have the road and to have to have lands on both
je
sides.
dirais que
And I would say that a lot of people also, it's not simply the developers
il y a beaucoup de résidents aussi qui
that
ont été qui coupent à blanc toute leur terre
cut
jusqu'à temps
clear cut.
de garder une zone de
There are
protection.
others where they could have had a zone, a buffer zone, all along. Mr. Thibodeau, thank you, Worship. You talked earlier about the density of downtown, and you mentioned that we are shooting ourselves in the foot by building multifamily dwelling in other places, in other sectors. What? How can we amend our bylaw, or is it simply by having incentives that could bring them towards downtown? Do you have an opinion? My opinion on that, the simplest thing to do is to refuse the application for rezoning in the sector to R3. There already, if it was planned, there is a vision to make sure that that kind of development can be located in sectors. If we look at Gova, we have the perfect zoning to develop a multifamily dwelling. We've had two projects where we're able to give a building within 5 days because we had the good zoning. We didn't have to bring PAC for a variance, and we didn't have to bring it in front of council. But we have lots of property in Dieppe. But it's like I said earlier, there are advantages for a developer to pay much less. We have lands. Margaret, for instance, they were asking $200,000 for, but you added $3,000, and the rezoning goes through to develop their three apartment blocks. Two apartment blocks versus could be 400, 500,000. But when I look we don't need rezoning. There's a big block that will be built shortly on Dieppe Boulevard, almost across from the other one. If we don't want this to happen, we didn't have any rezoning application. Should we amend our zoning in that area? No, I think the municipality has invested enough on Dieppe Boulevard. Dieppe Boulevard is like a vertebral of Dieppe. It's where we find this density of people, and it's that densification that will make it such that business will want to settle on the Boulevard, but there's a mixture that we accept. That's when we have to be more conscientious. Thank you. I think it's important to separate two things: the lack of zoning and versus the existing zoning. So, Mr. Frenette, I come back. The spinal cord of the city of Dieppe. People forget the long term vision. If the city wants to keep on developing itself, so we acquired some property heading to meet our neighbors from Shediac. Do you talk about 50 years? Well, we don't talk about 10 years, but I mean, but I think we'll see a lot of traffic for many years. But this is what the vision of the time was, and that's what we've had the Dieppe Boulevard 15 years before what was planned. We had it 15 years before we were supposed to have it in the transportation plan of the province of New Brunswick. It was called Dieppe Bypass, not the old Dieppe Bypass, but not to bypass the city of Dieppe, but we know that we had it 15 years before it was planned. If we want to come back on the Dieppe Boulevard, I know several people who live there, like most of you, and the younger one. For them now to come in downtown Dieppe, it's far. It's far for them to come at Sobeys, at Champlain Place. That's a long way. So it depends where you live. It depends where you want to get your service. But the question everybody is asking, what will it take to have more business? Sometimes we have to go there, whether we want it or not. It depends how we want to think the future of our municipality. And that's why that was a discussion that is of great interest to me. We have to stop thinking about tomorrow. We have to think about 15, 20, 25 years ahead. It's not always easy. It's easier to solve daily problems, but by solving daily problems, the impact is of a much longer state. And if something happens, it's close to the Dieppe Boulevard. Those who were not in the last 2 years, I would say go and see the building that took place. We know, we've talked about it at the last council meeting. We'll have to undertake a study, a traffic study to see the need to add a traffic light to allow the people to be able to get on the Boulevard. I said more than expected, but just to add on your comment, I have a lot of firms, national firms that call me, and what they want to know is what is the traffic count on traffic, what is the planning for residential and the residential density for years to come, what will develop. That's what is important to be able to develop because we're aware that the Dieppe Boulevard has an attractivity that is more local than a ramp at Trinity, where it's more regional. And they're ready to invest, but they want to have that density to be able to develop and to make their business profitable. We only have two slides left. First one is we talk about non-traditional development. We have land where we allow more than one building, where we don't impose a public road. It's a private that has an incidence on the developer, and they are forced public work. They have to give an amount of money, or they're forced to give 10% of their land to the municipality. So some developers have an advantage over others, other developers, and we think there's matter to reflect if we want to allow this on certain property, if it's possible to have a public land, we should be able to meet the same requirements as the other developers, because there's definitely an advantage for some groups versus another one.
Puis finalement,
Finally,
rentrer dans la cour avant, comme vous savez,
the farmer
ça a été dans les médias.
it was in the
Vous êtes
media.
approché là, par
I was approached by reporters
une personne
and by the communication service. They've had a lot of
qui n'est pas d'accord.
requests.
Légalement, on ne peut pas les interdire. Il y a certaines personnes que le sud
Some person, the south is in,
cour arrière,
and the north is in their backyard. So sunwise, they don't have the same advantage. So where there's produce is not different. Rock garden where there are flowers is not different than people who plant trees in the front yard. What has been quoted, it was not the vegetables in the front yard. It was the structure. It was what caused the nerve of the war, and we can regulate it, but we can't prohibit it. We have the municipality of the Moyenne, Quebec, even Drummondville. They wanted to be forbidden and prohibit, and they went to court. So we could regulate the distance, we could regulate the height of the accessory structure. We could put a date when these structures are allowed. After a certain date, they have to be destroyed or dismantled. And if you find good that we put something concrete in the bylaws, such as a plain bylaw, that's something that we can present to you, to other files that we will bring to you. The material for the fences. We have more and more people who want to use undulated. It's not a material that is allowed. One reason is we've had bad experience in the past where some people made some firewood fire, the rebar, barbed wire, toll, and rusted, that is perforated. That's why we put certain material that was allowed, but it never take away some people from doing something that is not nice. Somebody could do a wooden pallet fence, and there's nothing to stop them. That's why we say when you live in an urban zone or we live in a city, it's hard to please everybody. We know we have a neighbor fight, and that's something we want to bring to you. And finally, the garage, the accessory garage. 2015 to 2017, we amended our zoning bylaw to allow accessory garage bigger than the rule. And we noticed that we still have application for variance because you saw one in the process of rezoning. But the PAC, they have such requests quite often, and it's something that themselves they mandated the staff. Must we amend it, or what must we do? There is a reason. I'm not saying that it's necessarily the reason, but it's not only to. There's activities that is happening in the garage, and it's a much greater size than the standard. And the request of variant of variance, we did not recommend it. We have that pressure. So if we have a validation from you, at least it tells us, but also the members of PAC, that it meets the general intention of the community. These are the last 2 points that I wanted to talk about. But that's the end of our presentation. The question is coming. Mr. Berido, followed by Mr. Godet. Thank you, Worship.
Quand tu parles de tôle ondulée, c'est tu parles de quoi?
Undulated toll,
Du corrugated,
corrugated steel.
ouais, ben comme
Well,
le marché des fermiers,
yeah,
comme
like the farmer's market.
ondulé, là.
The market with the material,
Puis c'est un produit qui est plus moderne ou postmoderne.
it's a product that is more modern. A lot of people want to build their fence
Mais l'intérieur,
like
ça coûte
the inside, but the outside is such well.
métal.
It would be a second question. We were talking earlier about
Ça peut être
zone.
qui sépare
It can be wood that will split the property, and we have it. These zones, Bell Street, between the new apartment block, and I was there recently. They developed the inside very well with these trees. And they asked me a question because after when some of these trees fall, they were asking if they had the right to remove these trees that fall. I said, do what you want. Or must they call the city to have them remove the trees that I said, I don't have an answer for you. Legally, I don't want to go too far because it's not my file. I'm not a colleague, but legally, if a tree falls and it's not on your property, you don't have the right to remove it. Well, if it was to fall within that forest, well, inside the forest that doesn't belong to them, they have to leave it there and call the city. All right, but something else when we were talking about a zone, we have on Dieppe Boulevard where we had to negotiate and keep a 15-meter zone, and today there's no trees and the left. When we talk about buffer zone, you need buffer zone 30 meters. So if we keep 30 meters between the trees, we have to make sure that the trees don't all fall down. You wish, if I may, with buffer zone.
Avec les arbres qui tombent.
It's a challenge with trees that fall. Bring you a plan how to manage these zones, these buffer zones, because they're all not all zones that we have access to. So the service is working well. They're managing the situation and it is classifying itself. But we'll bring you a program because there's a forest management program because it regenerates itself because the trees fall, we leave them there instead of removing them. That's all we want to present you at the beginning of next year so that you are aware and that we inform the population how we manage the buffer zone. We have several places and it has an impact. Mr. Godet, thank you, Worship. Just a question concerning the front yard of a tree. Is there regulations or bylaw that grants the length of the cut, clear cut? And is there anything that does not allow to do certain things in bylaws? Well, there's different bylaws. If I talk about hours, you won't be able to put a tempo shelter at a certain distance in the front, and the same thing with a building. Well, there's the regulated front yard, not far from Burke Street. There's a house that was recently built. It's only stone. It's stone. There's no lawn. It's rock. That's allowed. Well, that's one of the things when we talk about landscaping development. We're not specific whether it has to be allowed. It's on the norm. Everybody has but some plant. Well, that's a landscaping I don't have the answer ready, but it's not only lawn, landscaping, but people question themselves on the pertinence, the importance of having lawn. You have to water it, and it's not what it's more sustainable. But good question, but no answer. I can tell you that it's not only the lawn that is allowed. Thank you. Thanks. Madame Le Boutier. It has to do. Can we add the I'm not sorry, can't hear tap. Oh, if if there's no other question, that completes this presentation. I thank you for your patience and indulgence, and keep on night work. Nice discussion is always nice. I hope there's 27,000 people listening. Maybe there's not even 27. Good evening. Next discussion, we'll talk about the bus shelter, among other things, and all that is connected to it. When we talk about bus shelter, it connects us with all kinds of things. Monsieur Richard, good evening, Your Worship, and members of council. The presentation. A presentation for you to inform you more than anything else on the question of bus shelter. We talk about the shelter that are along the transit, the public transit, and we've been having requests from the citizens and yourself. You've asked at what time and where will we set these shelter. As you know, we've been expecting for 4 years. We were talking about possible financing from different government levels. That's why we were waiting. What I'm presenting tonight is the plan of action that we have. And as you know, we have a series of areas and places that were recommended by Kodiak Transit. And I present this immediately. So we have 5 bus shelters, 2 at City Hall, 2 at Samoa, 1 Eagle Hat, and 1 at the correspondence at the intersection of Park Street and Amiro. And we had a stop recently close to NBCC. We'll talk about it. It's been displaced, it's been removed to the new development of the du College Street. Talk about it in a few minutes, but this does not include the 2 shelters that are at CF Champlain, the 2 shelters that are there now, and also 2 shelters that are not being used presently. 1 in front of Alouette residence, further Alamiro, and 1 around Lakeburn Lumber. In all, we have 105 stops on our network. That's many when you think about it, many stops. By standard, we have 1 every 400, 500 meters. And when we get closer to City Hall, we talk about 1 every 200 to 300 meters. That's the standard that is presented in in 2020, this year. We will try to get rid of 2 old bus shelter. At the next meeting, we'll come to you with a resolution to that end. They're 2 old bus shelter that they're not within the model that we want. We want to get rid of it. And we also want to replace the shelter that was on NBCC. We have a resolution that will come on the 28th. We want to replace that one by a modern solar shelter, and we will try to develop a bus shelter at the correspondence IGA co-op if the weather allows and we can do it before the winter. That's our objective. So that bus shelter at IGA, people have been waiting for it for many years. That was number one priority of the city. And as I said at the beginning, we were waiting to see if we could get some financing, but we have an answer right now. We don't expect to have anything on a short-term basis. We said at least for the little money, if we can have a shelter for the people this winter, let's go at it. Let's do it. I would like to tell you that we plan a survey online survey as to our survey that should be announced tomorrow on the website. Uh, the staff are working on it to collect information from the people to see if there's other places that they want us to focus for the bus shelter that are maybe on development that could be found within our stop in 2021. It was part and parcel of the budgetary process, but we have a proposal for about 10 other bus shelter. And obviously, we have a preliminary list that was established of stuff that are priority for us, and that goes with Kodiak Transpo. And these areas, these places were determined according to some criteria, the busy and also the bad weather. If you go in front of on Amiro just before Lowe's, there is a bus stop that is used, very much used, but it is susceptible of the wind and rain. That's an example of where that we are aiming as far as the priority is concerned. And the next steps, while we pursue the discussion with the provincial government as to the possible financing that and we will propose in November a budget for this project. If we go ahead with all of this, we know that we need a tender call for the winter of 2021, the purchase and the development in the summer of 2021, if everything goes as expected, and we could try to push back 2022. That was a quick overlook on our plan and our actions for the next few years, the development of bus shelter. I don't know if you have questions or comments. Question or comments by the councillor, Mr. Benito, followed by Mr. Benito and Madame Lepoutier. Thank you, Worship. Just a comment on College Street. The way it was organized for these two bus shelter on both sides, it's well located, but it's available for people who will come to on the other side. They are really nicely placed. Who was responsible was my colleague, Angel, with the consultant, the engineers. It was the development structure for the future also. For the time being, we'll only have a bus shelter, but there's room on the western side for another. The network could have a bus that goes in both directions. This is being becoming a reality, and it could come out as to a possibility of amendment. Thank you to my colleague for that, Mr. Thibodeau. Thank you, Worship. We know that bus shelter are relatively expensive, and we don't necessarily have the budget to develop as many as we want. But is there a way of selling publicity that could be posted on bus shelter and could pay for the cost? We see that on buses. Why not on the shelter, on the bus shelter? Yes, you will see in a few weeks the memo is ready for you. So we have an estimated percentile for the purchase of two. We talk about 15,000 per bus shelter, and it's publicity plan. It's not given, but I think it's very reasonable when we talk about an asset that will be there for many years. The intention to have the possibility of adding publicity, but of course, there's other things to do. But we'll have the uh, 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 the system to do it. Miss Liberty, you
Quelle va être vraiment la pertinence de la désherbage si jamais on avait sur demande ou quoi que ce soit. Là,
I'm sorry.
quand même avoir fait ça aussi. De cette envergure-là, mais vous avez répondu du sens que
Well, you've answered the question I wanted to ask, and I didn't get the question because for some reason she's away from her mic. It's a good reflection. If our network should change, it could be that the bus shelter will be less useful. But we wait 1 minute or 10 minutes. It's more these places that we could target. But the challenge with the bus stop is the space that we can have at some places. It's almost not possible to install a bus shelter that is 5 to 10 feet. What we started thinking about is it could be used for two reasons. There could be places where we could install benches. Not everywhere, but a bench could be used for people who walk. That's a request we have from seniors to have benches along our trails. But we know we have people on Amiro and residences. They use our sidewalk a lot. But if you want to go walk and you want to take a break, where do you sit? That's something we're thinking about. We don't have plans for that, but it's something that maybe we could look at where we would have space between the border and the sidewalk. Well, instead of installing a bus shelter, it's a matter of thinking about it. So
Merci, ça nous amène
this brings us,
pour,
I think,
table pour cet item.
that brings us to
Prochain item,
next one,
on parle de
where we talk about
essentiellement plan.
a plan, strategic plan.
Oui, d'accord. Donc, la dernière présentation,
Stratégique, oui.
oui, ça c'est pour le plan stratégique. Là. On
This
vous
is
a
the strategic plan.
trois
We've sent you 3 documents. The presentation that you have is just a summary. You didn't receive it. So it's more to,
de fond. Là. Donc, comme vous savez, au niveau du plan stratégique, on a
as you know, strategic plan, we have 5 issues, 22 objectives. That's a lot. What we did since the adoption of this plan, the administration, we identify indicators. You receive them. The objective is to measure our plan, the success of our efforts and our initiative. As you can see, there's still yellow question mark. It's a document in evolution. We hope to complete it before the end of the year. Discussions are being had with different members of the team. Within the implementation of the plan, the administration managers met in January and we identified about 30 means that the administration thought was the most important to attain the aim targets. You receive a summary of these 30 means. You have yellow, blue dots, red. It gives you an indication where we're at. The administration also met in August to talk about it. So we are sharing it in the document. Finally, it's more for information purpose. The management team tried to prioritize our 22 objectives because 22 objectives is heavy. There's a lot, and sooner or later, when we make decision, budgetary or other. We have to make choices. We tried the exercise with management to see if we were unable to prioritize these 22 objectives. That's what we will present later on for your comments. As to the indicators, it's an internal working document, so the content could change. And we try to make certain things more realistic, if you wish. And as you can see, the results are more results that we will have on medium and longer terms. We have yearly, but if we talk about the uh, green cover, it's not overnight, but we give ourselves some target. As for the means, these are means that initiatives, programs that management and the staff put forward on a short term to try and make things go forward. So it was established following uh, kind of talking among everybody. There's other things that's happening besides the 30 that you received, but these were the 30 that was targeted to say this is it, and we are yearly kind of going back at it finally. As for the proposal of the objective, was to try and help management the choice and decision to come, and we did that exercise with the view of 18 months. It was a duration of 18 months period. It was in August. We said, where are we today? What objective should be priority for management for the municipality in the next 18 months when we arrive with is what was given to you with red, yellow. That exercise was made by comparing the objective inside their own. We have 22 objectives. We did not compare the 22 one against the other. We chose the 5 issues. I'll give the community development and culture. There were 4 objectives. We said, okay, of these 4 objectives, which one would be a priority? We did the same thing when we came to the issue for economic development. The same thing when we came to the 4 objectives that were inside the governance. So the documents that you receive show the priority objective. I have them here, but the last document that you receive, that is yellow, that has yellow, it shows, I don't know if you want to,
57.
page 57. Okay. So what is in yellow are the 8, if you wish, objective. The administration or the management thought were of a higher priority for the city for the next 18 months. So it's not in cement, but I don't know if you have reactions by looking at the document. If you have any questions for us, any surprise. The objective of the presentation tonight is just to show you we're working strategic plan. We want to make it a living document. At the last meeting, we talked about the values and we had reflection how to make our values go forward. It's not within concrete objective, but everything that has to do with strategic plan, want to make it livable. Mr. Cormier, do you have a comment? You wish it. It's a comment this summer during August 15th, we missed an opportunity to show our pride, Acadian pride. Some villages, some cities organize some demonstration by car, because the social grouping not being allowed, and it may be that it won't be next summer. In my opinion, we would have had an opportunity, and we will have one with cars to have an important car parade to show our pride as Acadian. Thank you, Monsieur Brideau.
Pat, tu parlais
when you talk about the 22 objective, something came to mind. I was working for the government. That was a priority. 22 objectives is heavy. Something else, I say, if we want to realize these objectives, well, you require people who manage people to accomplish these objectives. Do we really want to really go through red tape and at the end of the line we don't accomplish our objective? There may be a review, a revision to make sure that people are at ease to accomplish the objective. We're ready, want to compress, and you talk about what could happen at the end of the line.
Merci, Madame le
Thank
Président.
you, Mr. Boulier.
Oui, monsieur. J'avais des questions.
Yes, I had a few questions.
De ceci, mais à la fin,
What
que vous nous présentez, c'est juste des
what you present are only
en termes de
in certain indications and strategic
encore, on n'a pas finalisé.
plan. We did not finalize anything. Communication with now. This is just an overview. Planning as such with the strategies and the plan of action.
Encore dans la planification.
We're still in the planning. When the council adopted the issues and objectives to the staff, you were mandated to find a plan. So the plan that was established for now is to explain the means and the personnel. Each champion must develop a plan of action. No, that was not presented to council. In our case, I don't think it was a practice in the past. I know that especially Dieppe are doing things different than us. And in that case, what we did was to present the measures and indicators and the successes. That's our approach that we used in the past.
Alors, il y avait un endroit où ce que je trouvais
There was a place.
une présentation de
We had a presentation from Mr. Bichot. I think it's very confusing. We have the responsibility of the Economic Commission and now under Sports and Recreation.
peut-être à regarder.
Maybe we could to have the power and not the responsibility. Normally we shouldn't have that. We should have
Quand je
both.
regarde, là, on a l'Agence de développement.
But now look, we have the Economic Development Commission. Dieppe would be responsible.
Développement économique. Favoriser le développement.
Made to favor the development of a tourist destination in Dieppe. The difference is the other one, the sports tourism, it'll belong to sport and recreation. That's a different thing. So it's not the same thing. I believe that what you just read, that was in one of the objective as a mean, in the objective. The means, well. So, as for the objective, they are in the issues of development, economic, but it's not expansion yet. That take care of that file. I think that file is shared inside. It's an objective. It's what you could notice with that objective and it's specific to one sector. It's a global objective for the municipality, and then we can have a champion of that file, but there can be different people who are responsible for it. The sustainable development, it can be with Andre and Alexandre in the development planning, but all the sectors of the municipality are working on initiatives that will contribute to the success indicators that we have presented to you. So everything the people will do, the initiative should contribute to our indicators of success, directly or indirectly. So it's a little bit the same thing. These are indicators or targets. So it could be that with recreation, they're talking with initiative, but it could have one with expansion Dieppe as that is for tourism. the program they want to bring us tonight. I don't know if it answers your question. Yeah, okay.
La question, c'est la cible,
The target.
ouais. Puis encore, ça serait juste à
Well, again,
au point de vue
it has to do
favoriser le développement des terrains
favor the development of land that is visible
industriels
in industrial park,
5 acres par année.
and then 5 acres per year.
Moi, j'aimerais voir plus que
Personally, I would like to see more than 5 acres.
si on peut
I
élaborer
would
des
like to see if we
projets
could
de
develop more because
semble
a land that's 5 acres
possible.
seems that it should be more.
Ben, ah, c'est juste,
Well,
ça m'a surpris quand j'ai vu le seul
it over.
cible, c'était 5 acres.
It shocked me when I saw the 5 acres. Well, maybe on that I'll follow up with expansion yet, but I think their average of sale was one land of 5 acres per year. That's why it was there, but I'll
Autre chose à s'ajouter.
follow up. Something else to add to that?
J'aimerais mieux comprendre votre tableau.
I would like to understand your table to tell me what the figures are all about.
Page 57, lorsqu'on a
Page 57.
1,
We say one. At the bottom, we have percentages of supports 52, 55. Is it the number of votes that allowed to align the priority? The number of votes? No. It was rather, if we look inside the issue, but it was the percentage that was received in that vote. The objective will compare one objective to another. So all the managers and the directors voted, and DCC1 by opposition DCC4. You see in yellow. Well, that's the objective, that one that had in the column at the bottom, we see the percentage. That's the percentage of support the DCC1 had over DCC4. So it's not really, I don't think it's pertinent too much, but it shows you if you want to compare those details. Thank you, Mr. Gadet. Your worship. I see your strategic plan for 2020-2024. You prioritize as of from January the different initiative, and one of the initiatives that I see here is the question of website. Not started yet. Is there a reason? Is there a lack of money or lack of tools or what? What's the reason? I think that in the plan of action, there are certain means that are spread over 3 years. There are steps and previous step before we start a project. So it's a way of implementing these things. Is there a decision of not starting before a given date? Well, in that case, if my memory serves me right, I think the objective was to wait next year to implement it. Well, there are nevertheless things that are happening, maybe in the fall, but I think when we made that up to date, nothing had started. Mark, no, that's exactly it for a budgetary reason, but it was planned for next year. Thank you. Some decisions were made to delay certain things because of vapid hiring of staff and things like that. And it had an impact. That's a specific department where we delayed the hiring because of the COVID. I can make a follow-up with my colleague Annie, and it was in 2021 to undertake the first phase. Well, there's a component. Everything is part and parcel of. They are doing interview to see what are the needs.
Monsieur Thibodeau.
Mr. Thibodeau, thank you, Your Worship. In your 8 priorities that you identified, in Group 3, P1, identification of downtown, very well, but I think that EP4 be a destination for francophones in Atlantic Canada. That's very important. That's a priority also because we've been talking about it for months that we want to attract and bring people back to Dieppe. So I think we should develop that priority more than we're doing. That's exactly the kinds of discussion, to my surprise, and you have a lot of questions tonight, and I didn't know it's not a document that show too much interest, but I'm happy that you have those kinds of questions because that's exactly the reflection that we want to see. What is presented is the view of the management, and you are the ones who will establish the objective for the municipality. So if it can bring about some reflection, we'll come back on it. But it was one of the things that some of us said, oh, it seems that immigration, yeah, was set aside and maybe we said differently. You're completely right to bring it. If I can add, I think that we did not put immigration as less important, but when we had that conversation, is that we must identify our downtown, create that atmosphere so that the life and the diversity will be like we lived the connection zone last year. So we have to dress our downtown for people to be attracted, not because the other one is less important, but we were prioritizing one so that the other one would complement afterwards. But of course, we are not setting it aside. We recognize that it's important. No other question? I don't see anyone else. Okay. So I thank you for your presentation. I think this completes this part, and this brings us. That's it. Good evening, everyone. No, Monsieur Brideau. Yes. Your Worship, I want a question for our manager, our director. Since Halloween is coming, I had a request on the weekend. Some neighbors want to organize kind of a small private party the Saturday before the election, before Halloween. They were wondering if they needed a license from the city. I heard in the news that the province has not decided yet if there would be a Halloween or not. So I said I would ask you the question. I think that further the question, they want to organize a festivity in the public park. I heard that today we made the request to the province, see what are the indication that they ask us to follow. We did it on behalf of the 3 cities, Moncton, Review, and Dieppe. Within the province, some cancel it, some have festivities organized in the community. When you have 2 or 3 thousand people have 27, 50, and 60 in Review, it's a different organization. So we're waiting for the answer, and we hope to have a guideline before the end of September to spread the message and to adapt according to public health guidelines. We are waiting. Thank you. Right. We're trying to find ways of not depriving our little Halloweener, but we want to have the cautions to avoid a second wave. We know they'll have masks though, but it's not the same kind of mask. Fine, thank you, and good evening, one and all, everybody. Thank you.